This video is about this gorgeous little Seiko Lord Matic with, I'll try and get it in the light there, with the chocolate dial. How lovely is that? It's the one with the 5606 movement, which is a movement I've worked on quite a lot, and you know, it's also a movement which has its own little special characteristics, and I'll cover those in the video. Anyway, we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to take this watch completely apart. We're going to put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and fix up the date complication, and put the watch back together, regulate it, do a full proper service. So it's the Seiko Lord Matic caliber 5606. If you enjoy my videos, then please subscribe. Making a lot of good videos at the moment, so a lot of entertainment and information coming your way, but we've got a lot of work to do with this watch, so let's take it to the watch bench now. And before we open the watch up, it's just a good idea just to have a quick look around the watch, make sure we have an understanding of what we're dealing with. And yeah, so here it is, a little Seiko Lord Matic. As I say, the movement is the 5606. This one is not the version where you have to come in through the glass to take the movement out. A lot of the Lord Matics had cases where you had to do that, but this is a normal screw down case back, which is going to make life a little bit easier for us. So the date complication, what it should do as we just pull this out and turn that is we should be able to engage with the date complication, and whilst I spin this either way, the hands want to engage, and the date complication isn't working there at all. So the other thing that we're just going to do with this watch is put it on the time grapher just to see what the performance is like before we start working on it, and then we will get and open it up, take the stem out, and get the movement on the movement holder. So I'm going to show the whole process, so let's put it on the time grapher now. So here is the watch on the time grapher, playing me around a little bit with the focus, but we don't really want to focus on the watch, we want to focus on what the time grapher is telling us. And as you can see here, the watch has issues. It doesn't have a lot of power on it at the moment, but nevertheless, and I think also the lift angle is probably a little bit wrong. If I remember, for this movement it should be 54.5 and I've got it at 52, but it doesn't make a lot of difference. Certainly doesn't make the difference that you're seeing there. Okay, this watch is losing 2 minutes a day, the amplitude is really low. Horrifyingly, it has an 8.1 millisecond beat error. Okay, so that's all something we're really going to have to sort out, and sort out the date complication on this watch before we can call it a decent service. Okay, we know what we're dealing with. Let's get and open the watch up and let's get into the movement. So we've taken the strap off, and that will go in the ultrasonic cleaner, and we've put the watch on the stand here to remove the case, and to do that we're just using this standard little, see if I can get that in focus, little case back removal tool, and I've just set it to the right size for the indentations on the case back there so that it can get a good hold of it. Now it's a good idea when you do this just to put a bit of plastic over the top of the case back, because sometimes the case has been put on with a little bit of force, and we might need to use a little bit of force to get it off, and what we don't want is the tool slipping and scratching the case back. So just put that on there, and we're just going to locate this here. Might take a little bit of, just put that one in there, that there, that there. Okay, and then we're going to give it a bit of a turn. and there we go. Off it comes. So once it's loose, you can do the rest with your finger. So let's just take that off now, and just using our fingers we can take the back off the watch. Okay, that way you get it off without scratching it at all. Okay, and inside we will see this very pretty little Seiko movement. You can just see the balance there. I'm just going to tick it up carefully without letting the watch fall out, and you'll see the movement. Okay, and there we go. That is the Seiko 5606. Nice balance there, rotating away nicely. So what I'm going to do now is take out the stem and get the movement out of its case, and then we can get on to removing the hands and the dial before we put the movement in the movement holder. So let's do that. So just selecting the right screwdriver to take out the rotor arm. Just grasping the watch now. Hopefully my finger's not in the way. Just check that now, it's good. And just come in here and unscrewing that retaining screw there. I always use curved tweezers for almost everything because it's easy to grab stuff like that, and you need your little pots ready to, he said, hang on, you need your little pots ready to put all the stuff in so that you don't lose anything. Say, voila. Okay, so we're just going to lift off the rotor arm now, nice and carefully. Just come in here and lift that off. Okay, just hold and move it. Give that a little bit of a go. Okay. So that's the rotor arm away. What I just want to do now is lift out the balance. So need a different size screwdriver for this. That's about right. Okay, and coming in here and just a little bit of force on this, tension on that, take it up, and you can see the balance just faltering there. That's fine. Okay. Now you can hang the balance on a little pointy spike, and a lot of watchmakers do that, and that's alright for a short period of time. I actually like to just flip the balance over, and so that the pivot at the top of the balance remains resting in the top jewel. So we're just going to come in here now and just lever this up gently. Everything wants to be nice and gentle. Sometimes takes a little bit. There you go. Okay, it's lifted out the hole. Now, just grab that gently. There we go, like that. So I'm just going to flip that upside down. Okay, and I'll come in and show you. There we go. So that is kind of the way I like to keep it, and that way the spring is not under any kind of tension whilst it's at rest. So there we are. We've got the balance out now. I'm going to put that somewhere nice and safe, and keep the balance cock screw with the balance, so that you don't jumble that up later. And so let's get on now and remove the stem, and then take the movement out of its case. Okay, so I've removed this spacer and the other movement spacer. So there was just around here there was a movement spacer. I've taken that out. I've also removed the stem. Now that's reasonably straightforward. In this movement, you see this little dimple that is here. You just press that and that clears the way for the stem to come out. So literally give that a little press there and keep it pressed down and just pull out on the stem and it will come free for you. And as soon as it does, and you're taking the space, you can see the movement now is swooshing around in there a little bit. So best for us to get the movement out now so that we can get the hands off and the movement in the movement holder. So all we're going to do now to remove the movement is place a little bit of plastic over the back so this can't go anywhere. We'll give it a little flip over. Okay, put that on there and just take that out. And there we have one. Really, look at the colour of that. I love a chocolate dial. Now this movement is actually or rather this dial does have tritium on it. So we're going to be careful with this dial because tritium is a radioactive substance. It's in very good condition, so we're not that concerned about it. But nevertheless, we want to treat it carefully because we don't really want to snort flakes of tritium up our nose. That's not going to do us much good. So we're going to carefully put the stem back in, get the hands to the 12 o'clock position to make it easier to take them off, and let's do that. So now we've got the dial out and we're working directly against the tritium here. I just put some gloves on to protect my hands from that. This dial's in good condition, so it's not really an issue, but we need to be a little bit mindful of it. The first thing we're going to do is put the stem back in there so we can manipulate the hands again so that, there we go, stem just puts back in, and then we can pull it out to, there we go, and then we can turn the hands to midnight. That's just gonna, let's turn them so they're in line with the second hand. It's going to be better, just like that. So all three hands are together. Turn that like that, and then pop this over the top. Voila. And then we're going to take the hand levers that we've got. There are machines you can get for removing the hands, but on smaller watches I find the levers are actually more helpful, more easy to do this. So we're just going to come in here. So I just turned on the lights here to give a slightly better look, and I'm just going to have to come in here really carefully, get the levers underneath the dial like so, and just the big deal here, it's a very pretty dial, so the big deal here is not to damage the dial. Just lever it off like that, and there they are, there's the hands off. Voila. And we'll just take a curved pair of tweezers, just very gently pick up the hands and place them in the little pots that we have for the purpose of this. Okay, and that is the hands away. So now we have to remove the dial, and the dial will have some retaining screws. Just going to show you those. There you can see, the camera will just focus a moment, there it goes. That's one of the retaining screws, I should say, right here. And there's another one on the other side. What we're going to do is loosen those and just prise the dial away. What's also a good idea once you've done that is just to screw those screws back into the movement, so they're just not another screw that you have to figure out where it goes later. I'm just going to do that now, and then we'll come back to the video when I've got the dial off. Okay, and there is the dial off. There's a couple of little spacers around the movement as well. Just need to note the position of those. And what we're going to do now is put the dial safely away so it doesn't get damaged, and then we can get the movement on the movement holder and get into the service proper. So we have the dial off and the little spacers around the dial removed, and I think it was those that was causing the problem to the date complication, because there is nothing wrong with this date complication, and I often find this with this movement. So you know, that is actually quite crisp. Going the other way just does this. So you know, that's the first thing that we've solved. So what I'm going to do now is get into the calendar works, strip the watch apart. We'll use time lapse a little bit for that, and I'll stop at appropriate places to point out certain things about this movement as we strip it down. So stopping now briefly just to look at the quick date change mechanism, which is working fine. If I just move this back and forward, you can see there the small plastic part with the prongs on it just moving to the left and the right, and that's how it should work. It is a plastic part that actually shifts the inner date there, and you can see it moving out there, and if the date ring was there it would shift that around as well. But actually, you know, so long as it's not under any pressure, it will work fine. It's when it gets jammed, as it obviously was before we opened up the movement. But that's how that works, and that's all looking good. So a little bit of camera wobble with the magnification we're using here, but I just want to stop at this point to point out a couple of things that you're going to need to be careful with now. We have two of the really small springs, and these are the bits that if you're not careful with, they'll fly across the room. And there's a general rule is once something this small has flown across the room, you're not going to find it. So you really need to be careful here. Just to point these out, we've got one spring which is right here. Okay, that little spring there, that's got to come out. And also we've got another one. You can just see it tucked underneath this wheel here, and that's just helping to push this wheel to one side under tension. So we're going to have to be really careful with those. I'm going to lift the camera out of the way. The technique is to put a small bit of pegwood over the spring as you lift it out. So what you tend to do is put a little bit of pegwood over it and then lift it out gently with the screwdriver. But you need to go slow with this because it's boring if you lose these springs. Okay, let's move on. And there then is the calendar works and the keyless works removed. So what we're going to do now is flip the watch over and take off the automatic works and the train and strip the whole watch, the rest of the whole watch right down. Having turned the watch over, the first thing that we're going to have to deal with, just to make sure that we don't forget it, is another of these little springs here, and then we will take the ratchet wheel off. In fact, we'll put the we'll just make sure that there is no tension on the spring. So you'll see the stem going back in and then me letting down the tension on the spring. Then we're going to do the ratchet wheel. We'll start to take off the automatic works here and the crown wheel, and then we will lift off this main bridge at the top, which will reveal the powertrain and the pallet fork here. So I'm going to put that on time lapse, and let's do that now. And there's the powertrain and the barrel exposed now, which I think looks really, really pretty. Okay, so we're going to lift all this out now, and then we will lift out the pallet fork cock and the pallet fork, and then pretty much that is the movement disassembled. Okay, I've seen a lot worse, but as you can see there, I don't know if I can come in a bit closer. Yeah, let's do that. In between the parts of the spring there, you can see those dark marks, and that's where the grease and lubricant over the years has dried out. So this spring is a little bit gummed up, and that probably accounts for the low amplitude. So one of the nice things about doing a service like this is we're gonna take the spring out, give it a good clean, and well, actually I think probably we're going to put a new spring in, actually, looking at that. So I don't know, it's touch and go, but seeing as we've gone to the trouble of opening up the watch, it's probably a good idea to put a brand new spring in there with a little bit of nice Swiss spring grease. Try and get the amplitude right back up. Let's do that. So with the watch now fully taken apart, what we're going to do is we're going to put all the parts that need cleaning into the ultrasonic cleaner, and as you can see there, we put the parts in the little wire spheres there. They are actually tea diffusers, and you can get them, really quite cheaply. And then we put them in the ultrasonic cleaner, firstly in this solution, which is made for the job. With a watch, you always need to be using exactly the right solutions, and then after they've had a degreasant in that, we rinse that off with another rinsing solution. So that's what I'm going to do now, and then I will cut to the bit when I'm taking all the parts out of the ultrasonic cleaner. We'll dry them off and then start putting the watch back together. And here they are then, some of the key parts that have just come out of the ultrasonic cleaning process. In the center of the frame there, trying to focus on that a moment, you can see the main plate, and then here we've got the top plate. The case also gets a good clean, as does the bracelet. Bracelets are magnets for all types of gunk that come off the wrist, so that's had a good clean. And then really importantly, we've got the powertrain. Okay, so there are the main wheels, the escape wheel in the center of the frame now, the pallet fork and the pallet cock, and also one little cog from the automatic works there. It's a nice jeweled cog. And importantly, we've got the case back, and then very importantly, the nicely cleaned barrel for the mainspring and the barrel arbor there. So yeah, so we're now going to put the new spring in the barrel, fix that assembly up, and then we can start putting the watch back together. Now when you're taking the watch apart, you'll wear protective gloves really for your sake, so that your hands don't get covered in all types of gunk that's on the outside and the inside of the watch. When you're putting the watch back together, once it's been cleaned, you wear the gloves for the watch's sake, so that you don't get any of the oil from your hands. That's the natural oil onto the metal of the watch, because that's not good for it. Anyway, here's the new spring, and it comes in this little circular retainer, which makes popping it in reasonably straightforward. What we're going to do is we'll take it out of the packet in a minute, and then we'll place it on top of the barrel. Once we've put a little bit of spring grease in there, and for that we use this, okay, which is, again, it's very good quality. It's Mobius grease, and it is specifically made for this type of application. So yeah, we're just gonna do that now. I'll probably put this on time lapse, so that you see the process, but it's not too drawn out. So that's the mainspring assembly all back together now, but it's shake there on the camera, just try and steady that down. It's important when you do this to do two things. Firstly, you've got to get the spring going in the right direction. If you've taken a photograph of the spring when you take it apart, you'll be able to see that. In this case, the spiral is moving around in an anti-clockwise fashion. Clearly, you've got to get the arbor fixed in the correct direction as well. And importantly, when you put the top on the barrel, it's got to sit flush. So if you look down the edge of the barrel there now, there's no, the top's not sticking out anywhere. It's nice and flush. Okay, always remembering that, in watchmaking, we're talking about microns, tens of thousands of millimeters, and that's the way these things are designed. So you've got to be a bit careful when you're putting this stuff back together. But that's the mainspring back together now, and that enables us to start putting the watch together again. Now you put the parts back, unsurprisingly, in the reverse order that they came out, and I've now put the train back in, and a couple of the automatic parts, and the main top bridge. And I always really like this part because it's where we get the train operating in a really nice, free and lubricated way. I guess the one exception for putting stuff back in the reverse order is the pallet fork, because as you're doing this bit, you really want the train to be free, and of course the pallet fork's job is to regulate the power out of the train. So if it's there, it will block the train, and you won't be able to do what I'm doing now, which is put a little bit of power on the train, and then as you see there, you can see the whole train going towards the middle of the frame. It's a little bit dark, but you can see the escape wheel going there, and I'm always putting no pressure on the it's tiny little bit of pressure on the spring barrel there, and the train is moving really nicely because it's all lubricated now. Okay, so as you're putting this top back on, the way to do it is to put it on loosely, but put the screws on loosely as well, so it's roughly in the right place, and then ease it down, and then just move the spring and sort of jiggle it about until the pivots find their location. And you'll know when they're in, because when they're in, they'll behave like this. Now, if they're not behaving like that, then do not tighten down the top bridge, because if you do, the reason they're not spinning is because one of the pivots isn't in, and if you tighten it down without the pivot in, you will snap the pivot off, and then you have yourself a bit of an issue. So yeah, I'm just gonna carry on now putting this back together and stop every so often to let you know how it's going. Now, before we put the calendar works back on, I just want to point out some stuff at this point that you need to make sure that you've got right. And it's a really good time to do this because if you don't make sure that you've got these bits right now, then you're gonna sort of regret it downstream, because the only way to fix it once you've put the watch back together is to strip it down again. So first thing we're going to look at is the date toggle here. So this small plastic part here, this should, when we pull the stem out to the first position, this should, and turn it, should toggle between the inner date ring and the outer date ring. So that's one thing to check and make sure that's working okay. The next thing to check is that when we pull the stem completely out and turn it, that it does push power through to the center and turns this wheel here, which in turn will turn the hands, and that's the way in which you obviously set the time. And then, really importantly, we're just going to check that if we put a little bit of power on the watch, that this wheel that I'm pointing out here turns. And that's because this watch does not have a centered cannon pinion. So normally the power will come through the center here from the train onto the cannon pinion. In this movement, the cannon pinion is offset, and actually the cannon pinion is sitting in this jewel here. Okay, now I'll show you the part in a minute, but it's a classic example of when and why movements need a service, because the cannon pinion comes attached to the wheel, and there are actually a couple of pinions on there, because you've got the pinion itself, the cannon pinion, and also the pinion for the wheel, and they need to move independently. And so if that part is not lubricated, when it goes back in, this part of the mechanism can seize, and it's a common fault with this particular movement. So we just need to check that that's okay. So we're going to just do that now. And so just taking hold of the stem, in the first position, it should wind, and that's what it does. And when you see that wind, okay, there's no regulation on this at the moment. So essentially what's happening is that we're giving the spring a little bit of potential energy, and then it's discharging that through the chain with no resistance at all. And the key thing is that you see that wheel that I pointed out, and it's this one here, move. If that doesn't move, then you're in problems. But as you can see, because we've lubricated it, it's moving nicely there. So that's the first check that we're going to do. And we pull it out to the first position and check that the date toggles. And as you can see, it toggles quite nicely there. And then the last check, of course, is we're going to pull it out all the way and then check to see that that brings power. And again, you can see that wheel that I pointed out moving, and that's gonna give power to the hands. Okay, so that wheel needs to give power to the hands from the stem and also from the train, and that is the component that I'm going to show you in a moment is the bit that achieves that. Okay, so just a useful point in the reassembly of this watch to point out those things, and this is the time to check them, not when you've put the whole watch back together. Okay, let's have a look at the cannon pinion. So with this 5606 movement, the cannon pinion is offset, and it's actually forms part of the second wheel. So you can see on this wheel, you see the wheel there, that on its shaft it has two pinions, the top pinion, which is closest to the wheel, that takes power from the mainspring, directly from the first wheel, which is the mainspring. And that drives power then down through to the second pinion, and the second pinion drives power through to the hands. Now, here is the thing. That second pinion needs to have a degree of friction so that when the top wheel moves, it does transfer the power, okay? Because if the friction within the hands and the calendar works is greater, the resistance there is greater than the force being applied by that lower pinion, then that lower pinion will just slip around the shaft, and you're not going to get any reading out through to the watch. It's just everything's going to move, but the hands aren't going to move, because essentially that bottom pinion will just be spinning on its axis. However, it does need to move. It can't be completely solid, otherwise you wouldn't be able to set the hands, because in setting the hands you'd be trying to move the whole of the powertrain, and of course you can't do that because you've got the regulation in there stopping that. So this is one of the things about this movement, and actually in this service of the watch I found that this particular example, and let me just, if I can just grab it here, show you this now. I found that this particular example had lost the friction. So if we come in here, you can see that just by literally by touching that's lost its friction, okay? And that means that the watch can be working fine, you can get all the kind of characteristics out, but you're not going to be driving the hands around, because this is just going to be slipping on the shaft, okay? So this, and along with the plastic calendar wheel issue that you get, the bit that drives the calendar wheel is plastic. Those are the two things about this movement, the 5-6 series of movements that are potentially a little bit dodgy, because once this goes, you need to replace it with one that actually has the right amount of friction, because you're not going to be able to change that. Okay, so we have replaced this part, and with one that's good, and so let's get on now with the rest of the reassembly of this watch. And that then is what we want to see. The balance is back in. Don't forget to put the little spring that lives under here back in as you put the balance back in, and just remember not to overbank the balance as you put it back in. This one went first time, so that's really good. So we've got to put the rotor arm back on and get the dial and hands on and get it back in its case, and then we can start to do some tuning and regulation of it. So we're getting close now to this watch being back together. We've put on the calendar works, and also, although I didn't film it, I have taken out the balance, the bottom of the balance jewel here, and clean that and put that back. Clearly the balance is one of the key things to have lubricated, so that's a good thing to do at this stage before the rest of the calendar wheels go on. Just to do that, what I do is I make myself this little tool. You can see that the prongs of it are just the right size to get either side of the little brass retaining clip for the jewel there, and that you sort of put it on and rotate it round, and that helps to ease the jewel, ease the retaining clip off. It's not a good idea to use anything steel on that clip, because it's quite tiny and it will scratch and it will even bend. So yeah, just this is a little cotton bud. So what I do is I just cut off the end and then put a little snip in it like that, and then you can sort of manipulate that with your hands, get it the right size, and then you can get it either side of the part of the jewel there and give it a little spin round. Okay, so that's how that works. What we're going to do now is put on the day of the week wheel. I've checked that the operation is fine, that it all works. So you know, well, first thing we'll do is pull it out once, see if the date wheel, and you can see it's shifting over there nicely, and then oops, put it back, and it's turning the inner one as well. Pull it out further, and it should turn the hands, which it does, and then push it right back in, and it will wind the watch. Okay, so that's all working, that's good. So we're really close now. Put the day of the week wheel on, and then we're going to put the balance in and get the watch working again, and then we got some final checks before we put it in its case and check its performance. So okay, so we got the balance back in now, and just doing a quick check of the performance of the watch now. We've done the service, and you can see there that I've got a mobile phone microphone sat on top of the movement. It's just a handy way of zooming in on a good regulation. And although the microphone is picking up my voice, I'm going to be quiet in a minute. We've got some good results here. So looking then at what it's telling us, the amplitude is much higher, much more like, you know, if you look at the average amplitude there, it's above 200 degrees, which is good. It's not fantastic, but it's good. But most importantly, look at the we're looking at a second a day, and we've got a beat error of 0.2 milliseconds. So the trace that we're looking at, and it's picking up my voice a little bit, but the trace that we're looking at is, you know, that's like a chronometer really. And there is that beautiful chocolate sunburst dial, which I've just given a bit of a clean with some Rodico. And yeah, just putting the hands back on with this little tool here, which just helps you put them on nice and squarely. The trick is, of course, to turn the hands until the date just changes, so that you know that it's midnight, and then set the hands to midnight like I've done here, and then see if I can do it whilst I'm watching it on the film here. Just doing this via the camera and just coming on top of that. And it's a bit tricky when you give it a little push, not too hard, and that should be fine. And then the thing to check then is that none of the hands overlap, because you know, clearly they've all got to have their own clear plane to revolve around and not interrupt each other, otherwise the watch will stop. It's actually a very common thing after a watch has been serviced for the watch to stop because of that. So we're just going to check that in a second and pop it back in its case. And there it is, the service completely finished, and the chocolate dial there looking really, really lovely. So you'll remember that when we started out, the day date feature didn't work there, that complication. But if I now twist the crown on the first position, you'll see that that changes nicely, go the other way, and it does the date nice and snappy there. Okay, so that's good. Pull it out to the second position and it changes the time, and the tension there on the cannon pinion is really good too. You'll notice that the hands stop, that's what or the second hand stops. That's because, of course, it's got the hacking feature. Push that back in and that starts the watch again. So this service is complete. That's a good job done. I think, although I say so myself, what shouldn't. We looked at the performance of the watch, and the performance is really, really good. So this watch is going back to its proud owner, which is a gentleman by the name of Elek, who owns a large collection of these watches. So he'll be happy to have this particular attractive version of this Lord Matic 5606 back in his collection, properly working. So that's a good thing. We're pleased about that. So if you like my videos, please subscribe. I'm shooting a lot of videos at the moment, so there's going to be a lot of entertainment and information on watchmaking coming your way soon. But for tonight, I shall sign off there. Good night.